The journey a sermon takes from your brain to the pulpit can be a scary one, especially if you've never done it before. How do you get from the idea phase to the preaching phase of sermon development in a way that's powerful, impactful, and most of all, accurate? Let me give you 6 steps you can take in your first sermon to get from here to there. Let's dive right in. Step number 1, choose a biblical text. Some of the scariest words for a first-time preacher are speak on whatever you want. And if that happened to you, you probably have a bunch of topics floating around in your mind and you're paralyzed right now. Your first step is to find a biblical text that's going to form the foundation of your sermon. Take your time to choose the right text, but don't overthink it too much. Every word of Scripture is powerful. You can't go wrong as long as you preach the Bible. Let me give you one warning though. Once you have your text, you need to drop all your preconceived notions and let the text speak for itself. Resist the urge to form the text into what you want it to say. Choose a text and then commit to letting it speak for itself. Once you have your text, you're ready for step number 2, study the text. Study the text. One thing that's helpful for me is to print out my text on a single piece of paper, triple spaced with really, really big margins. That way I can start my sermon preparation process by just immersing myself in the text and taking tons of notes of what I see personally along the way. As you study this text at the devotional level, take special note of where you sense God has called you to make a change in your life. Write some notes in the margins of what God might want to transform your congregation in through this sermon. It's wise, in addition to just studying the text devotionally, to read a couple of good commentaries in your study as well. This can help you glean some additional insights and ensure you're reading the text correctly. Your pastor can help you choose a good commentary, or if you're on your own, you can use one of the commentary surveys I linked to in the description to find a commentary for your passage of Scripture. In a pinch, a good study Bible could work as a commentary source. I'd love to give you one warning here regarding commentaries. Be very careful about simply Googling stuff. There's a bunch of weird stuff out there on the internet. And speaking of the internet, all the links and points from this video are in the description right below. And so feel free just to listen. You don't have to take a ton of notes right now. So let's move on right now to step number 3, structure the text. Now that you have a text and know what it says, it's time to start putting the pieces together that will turn into your sermon. You're going to want to have an outline of the biblical text that walks you through what it says. I'd encourage you, as you built an outline, to start with the major movements of the text. For example, if you're preaching Matthew 5:13 through 16 on the salt of the earth and the light of the world, your major movements are very simple. Number 1, you are the salt of the earth. And number 2, you are the light of the world. Next, after these major movements are dialed in, move on to the text as a whole to build some subpoints under each of these major movements. Under salt, I'd say A, the risk of losing your saltiness, and B, the result of losing your saltiness. Under light, I'd say A, the power of light, B, the temptation to hide our light, and C, the command to let it shine. I might even turn let it shine into a third major movement of this text of Scripture. At this point, please don't overthink it. We're trying to land on a simple outline where you can simply explain to someone how to walk through this text. You know you've arrived at the right place when you can walk someone through your outline and give them a solid idea of what is happening in this biblical text. Now, this is where the big crisis in sermon preparation normally comes. I found the place we are right now is the place where most teachers normally get stuck. Even though you have a deep knowledge of the text, it can be overwhelming to wonder, how do I put this into the form of a sermon? If that's you, I have a whole webinar on storyform.church entitled How to Get Unstuck in Your Sermon Preparation. It's free and it's designed to help you if this is where you get stuck in the process. But right now, if you're still tracking, let's move right on to point number 4, develop a bridge between the text and your sermon. I do want to give special thanks to my preaching professor, Ramesh Richards, for this one. He has a really helpful rubric in his book to transition us from the textual outline to the sermon outline. It comes in 3 parts. First, identify the main point of your text. Second, identify the purpose of your sermon. And third, identify the main point of your sermon. So here's how this would work in the salt and light passage. The main point of the text is that God has made you into a powerful presence. And so the purpose of the sermon might be something like this. I want to encourage my congregation to lean in to the power that God has given them as His representatives. And if that's so, the main point of the sermon might become, learn to leverage your power as the people of God. Through going through these three components, we've catapulted ourselves from the textual world into the sermon writing world. There's only 2 steps left in our process, so let's go right now to the next one. Step number 5, use the structure of your text to create a structure for your sermon. At this point, don't worry about the introduction, don't worry about the conclusion. Start with the main body of your sermon. And using the bridge you created in step 4 and the textual outline you created in step 3, now create a sermonic outline. In the sermon that I'm preaching on Salt and Light, considering the main point is learn to leverage your power as the people of God, you might make the 3 points of your main body this. Number 1, you have preservative power. Number 2, you have illuminating power. And number 3, you need to learn to leverage this power to glorify God. Once you have these 3 main points written down, you can add an introduction, you can add a conclusion. The introduction sets up the text and our need to walk through it. The conclusion shows us how to live after encountering the text. In the description, I have a helpful rubric of the components of a good introduction, a good conclusion. So you can read there for more, and you're welcome to copy those and use them to write your own. But at this point, you are ready for step number 6, preach the sermon. Well, maybe you aren't entirely ready, but you're ready to prepare your sermon for its final preaching mode. You take this outline you've created and start typing out how you're going to walk through your introduction, walk through your main points, walk through your conclusion. Feel free to add in some illustrations as you type if it helps you teach your points. Practice your sermon out loud. Refine it based on where you find it becoming confusing or bogged down. Pray over your process and see what God continues to reveal to you along the way. If you have a full manuscript of everything you intend to say in your sermon, I'd encourage you to step into the pulpit familiar with your manuscript, but with your sermon outline memorized. That way you can just look at your congregation right in the eyes and preach the word. Our purpose here at Storyform's Preaching is to help you improve your next sermon with the tools of story formation. Feel free to reach out if you'd like any help along the way.